"He hit you?" Mafia boss asked coldly. "Tell me his name," he said, "and I'll erase him." The city of Harborview sat on the edge of the Atlantic like a bruise that had never quite healed, dark and turning darker with age. It was a place of stark contrasts, where the rusting skeletons of old shipping cranes loomed over the sleek glass towers of new money. The wind that whipped off the water carried the scent of salt and diesel, a constant reminder that this was a working town. No matter how many luxury condos they built on the waterfront, for Elena Ward, Harborview was not a landscape of industrial romance, but a cage made of double shifts and sheer exhaustion. At 26 years old, she had learned that the only way to survive was to keep moving and to keep quiet. She worked at the Rialto, an upscale Italian steakhouse that catered to the city's politicians, union leaders, and the men who moved money in the shadows. It was a place of heavy velvet drapes, dim lighting, and tablecloths so white they hurt the eyes under the crystal chandeliers. Elena adjusted the collar of her uniform, a crisp white button-down that she always buttoned to the very top. She smoothed the black apron over her waist, checking her reflection in the tarnished mirror of the employee locker room. Her face was pale, her hazel eyes framed by dark circles she had tried to hide with concealer. But it was the makeup along her jawline and the base of her neck that took the most time. She had become an artist of necessity, blending foundations and powders to mask the yellow and purple marks that bloomed on her skin like unwanted flowers. Tonight, her hands were shaking. She clenched them into fists, counting backward from 10 until the tremors subsided. She could not afford to shake. Spilled wine meant lost tips, and lost tips meant Derek would be angry. And when Derek was angry, the air in their small apartment grew so heavy it felt impossible to breathe. She pushed through the swinging doors into the dining room, the wall of noise hitting her instantly, the clinking of silverware, the low hum of conversation, the jazz piano drifting from the lounge. Table 4 was occupied. It was always occupied on Tuesday nights. Luca Marino sat with his back to the wall, a position that offered him a clear view of both the entrance and the kitchen. He was a man who seemed to absorb the light around him rather than reflect it. He wore suits that cost more than Elena made in 6 months, tailored to fit broad shoulders and a lean, powerful frame. His hair was dark, kept short and neat, and his face was a mask of bored intelligence. He was handsome in a severe, unforgiving way, with eyes the color of espresso that missed nothing. The staff whispered about him. They said he was the nephew of the Don, or perhaps the underboss, or maybe just a fixer for the Marino family. No one knew for sure, and no one was foolish enough to ask. "Good evening, Mr. Marino," Elena said, approaching the table with a pitcher of water. Her voice was steady, a practiced performance. Luca looked up from his menu. He did not smile, but his expression softened by a fraction of a degree. "Elena, good evening." He was alone tonight, which was rare, usually. He had 2 men with him, Marco, a stocky man with a scar through his eyebrow, and another silent guard who stood by the door. Tonight, it was just Luca and a glass of red wine that shimmered like blood in the candlelight. "The same as usual?" she asked. "Please," he replied. His voice was a deep baritone, smooth and cultured, lacking the rough, street-heavy accent that most men in Harborview carried. As she poured the water, Elena felt his gaze on her. It was not the lecherous, hungry staring she got from the businessmen at table 7. It was detached, analytical. It felt like being scanned by a machine that was searching for structural weaknesses. She resisted the urge to pull at her collar. She hurried away to place his order, her heart thudding a strange rhythm against her ribs. Luca Marino terrified her, but he was also the only man who looked at her and seemed to see a person rather than a servant or a possession. The shift wore on, a blur of heavy trays and demanding customers. By the time the last patron left and the lights were brought up for cleaning, Elena's feet were throbbing. She counted her tips in the back office, her fingers moving quickly over the crumpled bills. $140. It was a good night, maybe enough to keep Derek in a good mood. She changed into her street clothes, jeans and a thick sweater that swallowed her frame, and walked out the back door into the employee parking lot. The air was cold and damp. A gray sedan was idling near the dumpster, its exhaust puffing white clouds into the darkness. Derek Harlan was waiting. Elena opened the passenger door and slid inside. The heat was blasted on high, making the air in the car stifling and dry. "You're late," Derek said. He didn't look at her. He was staring out the windshield, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel. He was a handsome man in a boyish, rugged way, but his eyes were always restless, always looking for a slight. "We had a late table," Elena said softly, buckling her seatbelt. "I'm sorry." Derek turned to her then, his gaze dropping immediately to her pocket. "How much?" $140, she said, pulling out the cash. He snatched it from her hand, counting it with a sneer. "That's it? For a Tuesday? You must have been slacking off. Or maybe you just look tired. I told you to wear the red lipstick. It gets better tips. I forgot it." She lied. He laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "You forget a lot of things. Elena." He reached out and took her left hand. For a second, she thought he was going to hold it affectionately. Instead, his fingers wrapped around her wrist and squeezed. He found the space between the bones and pressed down. Hard. Elena gasped, her body going rigid. The pain was sharp and immediate, radiating up her arm. She forced a smile, knowing that pulling away would only make him squeeze harder. "You need to try harder, babe," Derek said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I'm trying to build something for us here. I need you to pull your weight." "I will," she whispered. "I promise." He held the pressure for another 3 seconds, 1, 2, 3, before releasing her. He patted her thigh as if nothing had happened, put the car in gear, and drove out of the lot. Elena stared out the window, rubbing her wrist where the red marks of his fingers were already beginning to fade, disappearing into the old bruises underneath. 2 nights later, the atmosphere at the Rialto was frantic. A convention was in town, and the restaurant was packed to capacity. Elena was moving on pure adrenaline, balancing 3 plates on her left arm as she navigated the crowded floor. Luca Marino was back at table 4. This time, Marco was with him, speaking in low, urgent tones while Luca listened, his face impassive. Elena approached the table to clear the appetizer plates. As she reached across, a busboy rushing past bumped into her. The heavy ceramic tray on her shoulder shifted violently, the edge of it digging into her collarbone, right where a fresh bruise from yesterday morning was hiding beneath her shirt. She couldn't stop the sharp intake of breath, a small, pained hiss escaping her teeth, her body convulsed in a flinch, her shoulder jerking up to protect her neck. Silence fell over table 4. Elena stabilized the tray, her face flushing hot. "I'm so sorry," she stammered. Marco had stopped talking. But it was Luca's reaction that froze her blood. He wasn't looking at the tray. He wasn't looking at the busboy. He was looking at her neck. His eyes were narrowed, focused with laser intensity on the place where her collar had shifted just a fraction of an inch. Through the gap in the fabric, visible only for a second, was the sickly yellow-green edge of a mark that no clumsiness could explain. "Are you all right?" Luca asked. The question was polite, but the tone was different. The warmth was gone. It was cold, flat, and dangerous. "I'm fine," Elena said quickly, adjusting her shirt. "Just startled me. Excuse me." She retreated to the kitchen, her heart hammering. She felt exposed, as if he had seen through her clothes, through her skin, and straight into the shameful secret she carried. Luca watched her go. He did not turn back to Marco. He picked up his wine glass, swirling the liquid slowly, his eyes dark and distant. "That didn't look like she bumped a door frame, boss," Marco muttered, his voice low. Luca took a sip of wine, his gaze lingering on the kitchen door. No, it did not. The night ended badly. Derek was waiting in the alley behind the restaurant when Elena clocked out. He wasn't in the car this time. He was pacing back and forth on the wet asphalt, smoking a cigarette. Elena froze in the doorway, the heavy steel door closing behind her with a metallic click. "Hey," she said, trying to gauge his mood. "Who was he?" Derek demanded, spinning around. Elena blinked. "Who? The guy in the suit?" Table 4. I saw you through the window. You were hovering over him like you were offering something that wasn't on the menu. Derek, that's Mr. Marino. He's a regular. I was just clearing plates. Don't lie to me, Derek shouted, his voice echoing off the brick walls. He threw his cigarette down and stomped toward her. I saw the way you looked at him. You think because he's got money, you can shake your ass for him. You think you're better than me. No. Derek, please, Elena pleaded, stepping back. Her back hit the rough brick of the building. Keep your voice down. He closed the distance, his face twisted with insecurity and rage. You belong to me. Elena, you get that? You don't smile at other men. You don't look at other men. He didn't let her finish. His hand lashed out, an open palm slap that cracked against her cheek with the force of a whip. Elena cried out, her head snapping to the side. The impact sent her stumbling, her shoulder slamming into the brick wall. She tasted copper in her mouth. She didn't fight back. She instinctively curled inward, making herself small, turning her face away to protect her eyes. Don't you ever embarrass me, Derek hissed, grabbing her arm and shoving her toward the car. Get in. Elena scrambled into the passenger seat, tears streaming down her face, her cheek burning like fire. 50 yards away, in the shadows of the adjacent parking structure, a black SUV sat with its engine off. The window was cracked open just an inch. Inside, a man in a dark jacket lowered a digital camera with a telephoto lens. He checked the display screen. The image was grainy in the low light, but clear enough. It showed Derek's hand raised in a blur of motion. It showed Elena's head turned away, her hair flying, the terror visible in the set of her shoulders. The man picked up his phone and typed a brief message. Then he hit send. The next morning, Elena woke up with a throbbing headache and a jaw that felt stiff. She went to the bathroom mirror and inspected the damage. Her left cheek was swollen, a mottled bruise blooming across the cheekbone. The makeup took 20 minutes to apply, layer after layer of green color corrector, followed by heavy foundation, followed by powder. It looked like a mask, thick and unnatural, but it covered the blue. She told the other waitresses she had tripped over the cat in the dark and hit the nightstand. They nodded sympathetically, but their eyes didn't quite meet hers. They knew. Everyone always knew, but no one ever said anything. It was the rule of the city. Mind your own business. When she walked onto the floor for the lunch shift, the hostess stopped her. Table 4 requested you. Elena. Elena's stomach dropped. Not today. She couldn't handle Luca's piercing gaze today, but she had no choice. She took a deep breath, fixed a bright, brittle smile on her face, and walked to the table. Luca was there, reading a newspaper. He folded it precisely as she approached. He was wearing a charcoal gray suit today, his tie a deep crimson. Good afternoon, Mr. Marino, she said. Her voice sounded thin to her own ears. Elena, he acknowledged. He didn't look at the menu. I'll have the risotto and a sparkling water. He was watching her. She could feel it on her skin, a physical weight. He wasn't looking at her eyes. He was looking at her jaw, at the heavy layer of makeup that caught the light differently than the rest of her skin. She rushed through the service, trying to keep her face turned away from him, keeping her movements quick and jerky. Halfway through the meal, she was clearing a neighboring table. A businessman made a joke, loud and boisterous, and threw his hands up. His elbow clipped Elena's arm. It wasn't a hard hit, but Elena's nerves were shot. She jumped, and the water glass in her hand slipped. It shattered on the floor, shards of crystal exploding outward. Hey, watch it, the businessman snapped. God, she's clumsy, his companion muttered. Elena dropped to her knees immediately, her hands shaking as she reached for the broken glass. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, she whispered, panic rising in her throat. Derek hated it when she was clumsy. If she got fired... Stop. The voice was not loud, but it cut through the noise of the restaurant like a blade. Elena froze. A pair of polished black leather shoes appeared in her field of vision. A hand reached down, large, tanned, with long, strong fingers. Don't pick up glass with your bare hands, Luca said gently. He signaled for a busboy, who rushed over with a broom. Luca offered his hand to Elena. She hesitated, then took it. His grip was warm and solid, pulling her to her feet with effortless strength. "Come with me," he said. "It wasn't a request." He led her not to his table, but toward the service hallway that led to the kitchen. It was a quiet alcove, lined with wine racks, dimly lit and smelling of cork and dust. It was private. Elena stood with her back to the wine rack, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She stared at the floor. "I'm sorry about the glass. Mr. Marino. I'll pay for it." Luca stepped closer. He was tall, towering over her, blocking out the light from the dining room, but he didn't loom like Derek did. He didn't radiate chaos. He radiated a terrifying, absolute stillness. "Look at me, Elena." She slowly lifted her head. Luca raised his hand. She flinched, her eyes squeezing shut, her breath hitching in a sob she tried to suppress. He paused. He didn't touch her. He waited until she opened her eyes again, seeing that he wasn't going to strike. Slowly, with agonizing gentleness, he hooked one finger under her chin. His skin was cool. He tilted her face toward the overhead track light. Elena tried to pull away, shame burning in her chest. "Please, don't." "Stay still," he murmured. He studied her face. He saw the swelling beneath the foundation. He saw the way the makeup had cracked slightly over the raised skin of her cheekbone. He saw the faint yellowing at her hairline that she had missed. His eyes, usually so detached, grew dark. The pupils dilated, swallowing the iris until his eyes were almost entirely black. A muscle in his jaw feathered as he clenched his teeth. The air around him seemed to drop in temperature. "He hit you?" he asked. The question hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. It wasn't an accusation. It was a confirmation of a fact he had already deduced. Elena pulled back, stumbling slightly. I fell. I told you. I'm just clumsy. It's nothing." Luca stepped forward, closing the distance. He placed one hand on the wall beside her head, not trapping her, but creating a shelter, a barrier between her and the rest of the world. He smelled of expensive sandalwood soap and something sharper, like steel. "You didn't fall," he said. His voice was low, a rumble in his chest that she could feel. "And you aren't clumsy." Tears pricked Elena's eyes. She couldn't breathe. She was terrified that he knew. Terrified of what Derek would do if he found out she had been discovered, and terrified of the sudden, overwhelming feeling of safety that washed over her, standing in this man's shadow. "Please," she whispered, "just let it go." Luca looked down at her. His expression was no longer bored. It was fierce, possessive, and terrifyingly calm. He looked like a king looking at a desecrated temple. "Tell me his name," he said. Elena shook her head, a tear slipping free and cutting a track through the thick makeup. "I can't." "Tell me his name," Luca repeated, his voice dropping to a register that was barely audible but struck her with the force of a physical blow. "And I will erase him." He didn't say he would hurt him. He didn't say he would fight him. He said he would erase him. As if the man who had tormented her for 2 years was nothing more than a stain on a tablecloth, something to be removed, without effort or remorse. Elena looked up into his dark eyes and saw the truth there. He meant it. He was a monster. The city said, a dangerous man, but standing there, with his body shielding hers and his voice offering her a brutal kind of salvation. She didn't see a monster. She saw the only thing that had ever looked like hope. The service hallway was quiet, save for the distant clatter of the kitchen and the low thrum of the ventilation system. Luca Marino stood like a statue carved from granite, his hand resting on the wall beside Elena's head, creating a sanctuary that felt terrifyingly intimate. His demand hung in the air between them, a promise of violence delivered with the calm assurance of a man who controlled the weather. Elena pressed her back against the wine racks, the cold glass of the bottles biting into her shoulder blades. Her heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She looked up at him, at the sharp line of his jaw and the dark, abyssal depth of his eyes. And for a moment, she wanted to give him the name. She wanted to surrender the burden of her fear to someone strong enough to carry it, but habit was a heavy chain. 2 years of conditioning screamed at her that speaking up only led to punishment. If Derek found out she had complained to a customer, to a stranger. The consequences would not be a slap in an alley. It would be worse. And despite the rumors about Luca, she did not know him. She did not know if he could actually stop Derek, or if he would just make a mess that she would have to clean up with her own blood later. "It is not what you think," Elena whispered, her voice trembling but stubborn. Luca did not move. "I think a man put his hands on you. Correct me if I am wrong. We argued. She lied, the words tasting like ash. I provoked him. It was a mistake. I can handle it. Please, Mr. Marino. I just want to do my job." Luca studied her face for a long moment, searching for a crack in her resolve, when he found none. A muscle in his jaw feathered, tight and hard. He slowly withdrew his hand from the wall, the loss of his proximity leaving her suddenly cold. He straightened his suit jacket, his expression closing off, becoming the unreadable mask he wore in the dining room. "You shouldn't have to handle it," he said quietly. He turned and walked away without another word, disappearing back into the noise and light of the restaurant, leaving Elena alone in the shadows with her heart still racing and a dangerous seed of hope planted in her chest. 2 hours later, the atmosphere shifted from the polished veneer of the Rialto to the smoke-thickened air of the Grotto, a private members-only lounge on the other side of Harborview. Here, the lighting was amber and low, and the conversations were conducted in hushed tones over tumblers of single malt scotch. Luca sat in a high-backed leather booth in the far corner. He was not drinking. His hands were folded on the mahogany table, perfectly still. Across from him sat Marco, his lieutenant, who looked out of place in a suit but wore it with the same menacing utility with which he wore a holster. Marco slid a manila folder across the table. It was thin. "Derek Harlan," Marco said, keeping his voice below the hum of the jazz track playing overhead. 28 years old. Works out of a garage in the East End. But that is just a front. He's a collector. Luca opened the folder. The first thing he saw was a mugshot from 3 years ago, a charge for aggravated assault that had been dropped. The face was handsome in a cheap, arrogant way. It was the face of a bully who had never been hit back hard enough to learn fear. "Who does he collect for?" Luca asked, his eyes scanning the rap sheet. "The Novak crew," Marco replied. Luca stopped reading. He looked up, his eyes narrowing. The Novaks were a rival outfit, a chaotic group of Eastern European transplants trying to muscle into the port unions. They were sloppy, violent, and lacked the code of conduct that the Marino family adhered to. If Derek was one of theirs, he was not just a domestic abuser, he was an enemy combatant. "He's low level," Marco continued, "a muscle guy. He breaks thumbs for gambling debts and shakes down bodegas for protection money. But he has been bragging around town." "Bragging about what?" "About his girl," Marco said, watching Luca carefully. "He tells people he has a waitress at the Rialto on a leash. Says he likes breaking her in." The temperature at the table seemed to drop 10 degrees. Luca closed the folder slowly, his movements deliberate. The rage that ignited in his chest was not the hot, blinding fire of a temper tantrum. It was the cold, blue flame of a welding torch, precise and destructive. This was no longer just about a woman he had watched from afar. This was an insult. A Novak enforcer was putting his hands on someone Luca had silently claimed as protected, and he was boasting about it. It felt personal. "Keep eyes on him," Luca said, his voice void of emotion. "I want to know where he goes, who he talks to, and every time he steps foot near that restaurant." "And if he touches her again?" Marco asked. Luca stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Then we stop watching." The following week was a slow torture. Derek had sensed Elena pulling away, sensed the subtle shift in her demeanor since the night in the alley, and his response was to tighten the noose. He began showing up at the Rialto during her shifts, not to cause a scene, but to mark his territory. He would sit in her section, ordering the cheapest item on the menu and nursing a beer for hours. He was charming to the other staff, flashing a bright smile that didn't reach his eyes, playing the role of the devoted boyfriend waiting for his hard-working girl. But Elena knew better. She knew the way his eyes tracked her every movement, cataloging her interactions with customers, banking grievances to be aired later. On Friday night, the restaurant was bustling. Luca was there, seated at his usual table. Though he had not spoken to Elena since the hallway, he simply watched. Derek called Elena over to his booth. He had finished his beer and was leaning back, arm draped over the plush leather seat. When Elena approached, he reached out and hooked his arm around her waist, pulling her in close. It looked affectionate to anyone watching, but his fingers dug into her hip bone with bruising force. "Smile, babe," he whispered, his breath smelling of hops and stale tobacco. "You look miserable. People will think I don't treat you right. I have tables waiting." "Derek," Elena said through gritted teeth, trying to pry his fingers loose without causing a scene. "Please let go." He laughed, a sharp bark of sound, and squeezed harder before releasing her with a shove. "Go on. Then, go fetch." Elena stumbled slightly as she stepped away. She smoothed her apron, her face burning with humiliation. Across the room, she felt a weight on her. She looked up and met Luca's gaze. He was not eating. He was holding his wine glass, but he wasn't drinking. He was watching Derek with an expression of such profound, predatory stillness that Elena felt a shiver run down her spine. It was the look of a wolf watching a rabbit that had wandered too far from the burrow. Luca shifted his gaze to her, and for a second, his eyes softened, offering a silent message of solidarity that terrified her as much as it comforted her. The breaking point came 2 nights later. It was raining. A cold, miserable drizzle that slicked the streets of Harborview with oil and grime. The shift had been long, and Elena was exhausted. Derek was waiting by the back door again. He had been drinking, his mood volatile and dark. As soon as the heavy steel door clicked shut behind her, he was on her. "You were looking at him again." Derek spat, stepping out of the shadows. Elena didn't have to ask who he meant. "I was working." "Derek, it is my job to look at customers. Don't give me that smart mouth." He grabbed her jaw, his fingers pinching her cheeks, forcing her to look at him. "That fancy suit? The guy who thinks he is better than me? I saw you making eyes at him. You think he wants you? He wants a warm body for the night. You are garbage to him. You are mine." Elena's fear spiked into panic. His grip was tighter than usual. His eyes glazed with a dangerous mix of alcohol and insecurity. She tried to yank away, twisting her body violently. "Let go of me," she screamed. She broke his grip, but the momentum sent her staggering backward. She tripped over a discarded crate and fell hard against the rusted metal side of the large industrial dumpster. Her arm scraped down the jagged edge of the metal, tearing through her sweater and slicing the skin beneath. A sharp cry of pain tore from her throat. She clutched her arm, feeling the warm wetness of blood immediately soaking the wool. Derek loomed over her, breathing hard. "Look what you made me do," he sneered, pointing a shaking finger at her. "You do this to yourself, Elena. You make me crazy." Before he could advance, headlights swept across the alley entrance. A sleek black car turned in, the high beams cutting through the rain and illuminating the scene in stark relief. Derek froze, shielding his eyes. The car stopped, and the back door opened before the vehicle had even fully settled. Luca Marino stepped out. He did not have an umbrella. The rain fell on his suit, darkening the fabric, but he didn't seem to notice. He walked toward them with a stride that ate up the distance, his focus entirely on Derek. Derek took a step back, his bravado crumbling in the face of true menace. "Who the hell are you? Go!" Luca said. One word. Quiet. Final. Derek looked from Luca to the large driver who was now stepping out of the front seat. Marco. Derek was a bully, but he wasn't suicidal. He sneered at Elena, who was still huddled against the dumpster. "We will talk later." "Elena," he threatened. His voice wavering, he turned and practically ran toward the street, disappearing into the rainy night. Luca did not watch him go. He was already kneeling beside Elena on the wet asphalt. He ignored the grime ruining his trousers. His eyes were fixed on her arm, where blood was dark against her pale skin. "Let me see," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle, a stark contrast to the ice he had directed at Derek moments ago. He carefully peeled back the torn fabric of her sweater. The cut was long and shallow, but it was bleeding freely, mixed with rust and dirt. Elena was shaking uncontrollably, the adrenaline crash hitting her hard. "I am fine," she stammered, her teeth chattering. "I just need to go home." Luca looked up, meeting her eyes. The rain plastered his dark hair to his forehead, making his features look sharper, more intense. He shook his head slowly. "You are not going home with him tonight," he said. It was not a question. It was a decree. He stood up and extended a hand. Elena looked at it, the hand of a man who ran the city's underworld, a man who erased people. And then she looked at the empty alley where Derek had left her, bleeding in the trash. She took Luca's hand. The penthouse was a world away from the gritty reality of the alley. It was located on the top floor of one of the waterfront's newest towers, a space of glass, steel, and muted gray tones. It smelled of clean air and silence. Luca led her into the kitchen, a vast island of white marble under pendant lights. He had dismissed Marco at the door, leaving them alone in the quiet expanse of the apartment. "Sit," he instructed, pulling out a high-backed stool. Elena sat, clutching her arm. She felt dirty and small in this pristine space, her wet clothes dripping onto the polished floor. "I am ruining your floor," she whispered. Luca ignored her. He retrieved a first aid kit from a cabinet, not a plastic box from a drugstore, but a professional grade kit. He set it on the counter and washed his hands at the sink, scrubbing them methodically before turning back to her. "Give me your arm." She extended her arm, flinching as he rolled up her sleeve. His hands were large, engulfing her wrist, but his touch was agonizingly careful. He used an antiseptic wipe to clean the wound, his movements precise. "This will sting," he warned softly. He pressed the wipe to the cut. Elena hissed, her shoulders jerking up. Luca didn't stop, but he murmured a low, soothing sound, his thumb brushing the inside of her wrist, right over her pulse point. "I have got you," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through her bones. "Just breathe." Elena watched him as he worked. His focus was absolute. He treated her arm as if it were a rare, fragile artifact that he was terrified of breaking. She felt the heat radiating from him, a physical warmth that cut through the chill of her soaked clothes. She noticed the way his eyelashes cast shadows on his cheekbones, the slight roughness of stubble on his jaw. He applied a butterfly bandage to close the worst of the gash, then wrapped it efficiently in sterile gauze. As he secured the tape, his movements slowed. His hand lingered on her forearm, his thumb tracing a slow circle on her skin. The silence in the kitchen grew heavy, charged with a sudden, suffocating tension. Elena looked up and found him watching her. His eyes were dark, swirling with an emotion she couldn't name, something between rage at what had happened to her and a hunger he was fighting to suppress. He leaned in closer. She could smell him now. Rain, soap, and the unique masculine scent of him. Her breath hitched in her throat. Her heart was thudding so hard she was sure he could feel it against his fingertips. Luca's gaze dropped to her mouth. His pupils blew wide. For a second, the air between them crackled. He was close enough that she could feel the warmth of his breath on her cheek. She didn't pull away. She couldn't. Her body, usually so guarded, leaned almost imperceptibly toward him, drawn by a magnetic pull she didn't understand. She saw his throat bob as he swallowed. His hand tightened slightly on her wrist, possessing her for just a heartbeat. Then, he blinked. The mask slammed back into place. He pulled back, forcing himself to step away from the counter, putting 2 feet of safe, empty air between them. He took a deep, steadying breath and turned to dispose of the bloody wrappers. "You are safe here," he said, his back to her. His voice was rougher than usual, strained for tonight. The guest room was larger than Elena's entire apartment. The bed was a cloud of high thread count sheets and heavy duvets. She lay in the dark, wearing a t-shirt Luca had given her to sleep in. It was huge on her, smelling faintly of him, wrapping her in his scent. She stared at the ceiling, unable to close her eyes. Her arm throbbed dully under the bandage, but it was the memory of his touch that kept her awake. She remembered the way his large hands had trembled, just slightly. As he taped the gauze, it was a minute detail. invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for it, but Elena had seen it. The great Luca Marino, the man the city feared, had shaken while touching her. It confused her. Derek's touch was possession. It was about power and control. Luca's touch had been reverent. And that terrified her more than the violence. Violence she understood. Violence was a language she had learned to speak. But this simmering, restrained intensity, was foreign. She felt a curl of desire low in her stomach, hot and shameful. She shouldn't want a man like him, a criminal, a dangerous man. But as she pulled the duvet tighter, she knew she felt safer in the monster's lair than she had ever felt in the world outside. In the living room, the lights were off. The only illumination came from the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of Harborview. The city lights glittered below, a sprawling grid of gold and white against the black water of the harbor. Luca stood by the glass, a glass of whiskey in his hand that he hadn't tasted. He stared out at the city he ruled, but he saw only the red line of blood on Elena's arm. He had crossed a line tonight. He had brought a civilian into his home. He had let his personal feelings dictate his actions, violating the cardinal rule of his business: never get emotionally involved. He took a sip of the whiskey, the burn welcome in his throat. He thought about Derek Harlan. He thought about the fear in Elena's eyes and the way it had slowly turned into trust in his kitchen. He pulled his phone from his pocket and dialed, "Marco, boss." Marco answered on the first ring. "Put a team on Harlan," Luca said. His voice was deathly quiet. "I want 24-hour surveillance. I want to know when he sleeps, when he eats, and when he takes a breath. Dig into his connection with the Novaks. Find me a weakness. Consider it done. What is the end game?" "Luca?" Luca looked at his reflection in the glass, a dark silhouette against the city lights. "The end game is erasure," he said. He hung up the phone and tossed it onto the sofa. He wasn't just going to hurt Derek Harlan. He was going to dismantle him. He was going to take apart his life piece by piece until there was nothing left. It was a dangerous path. It would start a war with the Novaks. It would draw heat from the police. It threatened everything he had built. But as he looked toward the hallway where Elena was sleeping, Luca knew he didn't care. He would burn the whole city down if it meant she never had to flinch again. Elena woke to silence, a luxury she had not known in years. For a moment, she lay disoriented in the center of the massive bed, the high thread count sheets cool against her skin, the morning light filtering through heavy slate-gray curtains. Then the memory of the previous night rushed back, the alley, the blood, the rain, and the terrifying, gentle hands of Luca Marino. She sat up, wincing as the movement pulled at the bandage on her arm. On the bedside table, a tray had been placed silently while she slept. There was a carafe of coffee, a bowl of fresh fruit, and a stack of folded clothes. Elena reached for the clothes. They were brand new, the tags removed, but the fabric stiff with newness. A pair of dark jeans, a soft cashmere sweater in a muted cream color, and clean undergarments. Beside the stack sat a piece of heavy, cream-colored cardstock with handwriting that was sharp and angular. "I have arranged a car to take you to work. The driver will wait until you are inside. Derek will not bother you today. Eat something before you go." Elena traced the initials with her thumb. The note was efficient, commanding, and thoughtful. It made her chest ache with a confusing mix of gratitude and unease. He had taken control so quickly, stepping into the chaotic void of her life and organizing it with the same precision he likely applied to his business. It felt safe, but it also felt like she was being managed, a problem to be solved rather than a person to be asked. She dressed quickly, the cashmere soft against her bruised skin. When she took the private elevator down to the garage, a sleek black sedan with tinted windows was waiting, the engine idling in a low purr. The driver, a man with a thick neck and eyes that constantly scanned the mirrors, opened the door for her without a word. The ride to the Rialto was smooth and silent. As they pulled up to the curb, Elena saw Mia Torres standing near the entrance, smoking a cigarette before the lunch rush began. The driver waited, just as the note had promised, until Elena had stepped out and crossed the sidewalk. Mia dropped her cigarette and ground it out with the heel of her boot, her eyes widening as the black car pulled away into traffic. "Okay, spill it," Mia said, grabbing Elena's arm as they walked toward the staff entrance. "Who is the transporter? Since when do you get dropped off in a car that costs more than my entire life?" "It is just a friend," Elena said, keeping her head down. "A friend?" Mia laughed, holding the door open. "Honey, friends give you a ride in a Honda. That was a ride from a sugar daddy. Or a secret agent. Is he hot? Please tell me he is hot." Elena forced a laugh, but it sounded brittle. "It is complicated. Mia, really." She hurried to the locker room to change into her uniform, her heart heavy. She hated lying to Mia. Mia was the closest thing she had to a sister in Harborview. But how could she explain? "My abusive ex cut my arm on a dumpster. So the local mafia boss patched me up in his penthouse and sent me to work in his armored car." It sounded like madness. The shift was grueling. The lunch crowd was demanding, and the kitchen was backed up. But the real torture was the phone in her apron pocket. It started buzzing around noon. "I'm sorry, babe. I didn't mean to scare you last night. You know I get jealous because I love you." Elena stared at the screen, her hands trembling. She shoved the phone back into her pocket. 10 minutes later, it buzzed again. "Where were you last night? You didn't come home. You better not be with him." And then, 20 minutes later, "Answer me, Elena. Don't make me come down there." The vibration against her hip felt like a phantom touch, a constant reminder of the leash Derek had around her neck. She dropped a fork at table 6 because her hands were shaking so bad. She had to hide in the walk-in freezer for 3 minutes just to breathe, the cold air biting at her cheeks as she squeezed her eyes shut and prayed for the shift to end. Across the city, in a nondescript van parked 3 blocks from a mechanic's garage in the East End. The atmosphere was clinical and cold. Marco sat in the passenger seat, listening to the audio feed coming through his headphones. One of Luca's younger associates, a tech specialist, was monitoring the directional microphone pointed at the garage bay where Derek Harlan held court. "He's talking to them again," the tech said, adjusting a dial, the Novaks. Marco pressed the headset tighter to his ear. Through the static, he heard Derek's voice, loud and boastful. "I told you. I have got her handled," Derek was saying. "She works right under his nose. Marino eats there 3 times a week. She serves him his wine. And you are sure she is close to him?" A heavily accented voice asked. "Victor Novak's second in command." Derek laughed. "She is my girl. I own her. If I tell her to spill soup in his lap, she does it. If I tell her to listen to what he is saying to his lieutenant, she does it. Marino has a soft spot for her. I have seen the way he looks at her. He's weak for a pretty face. That is our in—" Marco's face hardened into a mask of stone. He took off the headset and picked up his phone. "We have a problem, boss," Marco said when Luca answered. "Tell me." Luca's voice came through, clear and icy. "It is worse than we thought. Harlan is not just a jealous boyfriend. He is selling access to you. He is pitching you to the Novaks. He claims he can use the girl to get close to your operation." There was a silence on the line so profound that Marco thought the call had dropped. Then Luca spoke, his voice dropping to a register that meant violence. "Does she know?" "No," Marco said. "Judging by the conversation, she has no idea. He's using her as currency without her even knowing she is in the game. Keep eyes on him," Luca ordered. "If he moves toward her, you end it." The sun had set by the time Elena clocked out. The sky was a bruised purple, and the streetlights of Harborview flickered on, casting long, jumping shadows on the pavement. She checked her phone one last time. Silence for the last 2 hours. Maybe he had given up. Maybe the alcohol had taken him under for the night. She said goodbye to Mia and walked toward the bus stop 2 blocks away. The black car was nowhere to be seen. The note had said today, implying the protection was temporary, a one-time courtesy. The thought made her feel incredibly lonely. The bus stop was a concrete shelter covered in graffiti. Elena stood under the flickering halogen light, hugging her arms around herself against the evening chill. She watched the headlights of passing cars, her nerves stretched thin. A gray sedan screeched to a halt at the curb, mounting the sidewalk with 2 wheels. Elena's heart stopped. She knew that car. Before she could run, the passenger door flew open and Derek stormed out. He looked disheveled, his eyes wild and bloodshot. "You think you can ghost me?" he shouted, crossing the distance in 3 strides. "Derek, please, people are watching." Elena gasped, backing into the plastic wall of the shelter. "Let them watch." He grabbed her wrist, his fingers digging into the exact spot where the bruise from 3 days ago was fading. "You didn't come home. Where were you? Were you with him? That rich prick?" He yanked her hard, pulling her off balance. Elena stumbled, her shoes scraping against the concrete. "Let go of me," she screamed, panic flooding her system. "Get in the car! Elena!" Derek snarled, dragging her toward the open door. "You need to learn some respect." He was strong. Fueled by adrenaline and rage, Elena dug her heels in, fighting him, but he was overpowering her. She was feet away from the open car door. Terrifying images of what would happen once she was inside flashing through her mind. Suddenly, tires squealed, a sharp, aggressive sound that tore through the night. A massive SUV swerved in front of Derek's sedan, blocking it in. 2 doors opened simultaneously. Derek froze, still gripping Elena's wrist. 2 men stepped out. They were not police. They were dressed in dark coats, moving with the synchronized efficiency of soldiers. One of them was the driver from that morning. "Let her go," the driver said. He didn't shout. He didn't draw a weapon. He just spoke with the absolute certainty of a man who knew he would be obeyed. Derek hesitated, his bravado warring with his survival instinct. "Who are you? You work for him?" The second man stepped forward, closing the distance terrifyingly fast. He reached out, grabbed Derek's wrist, the one holding Elena, and twisted it with a sickening pop of torque. Derek howled and released her. Stumbling back against his own car, Elena scrambled away, her chest heaving, clutching her wrist. The driver looked at Derek, his face impassive. "Mister, Marino suggests you go home, while you still have legs to walk on." Derek clutched his wrist, his face pale with shock and pain. He looked at Elena with pure hatred, but the presence of the 2 enforcers was overwhelming. He scrambled back into his car, slammed the door, and reversed blindly off the curb, tires spinning as he sped away into the darkness. The driver turned to Elena. His expression softened slightly. "Mister, Marino is waiting. Miss Ward." "Please, get in." The ride back to the penthouse was a blur. Elena sat in the back seat, shaking uncontrollably, the adrenaline crash leaving her weak and nauseous. When the elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse foyer, Luca was pacing. He had abandoned his suit jacket, his tie was undone, hanging loose around the collar of his white shirt, and his sleeves were rolled up to his elbows. When he saw her, he stopped dead. He crossed the room in seconds. He didn't touch her, but he loomed over her, his eyes scanning her face, her arms, her posture, checking for damage with a frantic intensity. "Are you hurt?" he demanded. His voice was rough, like gravel grinding together. "No," Elena whispered. He grabbed my wrist." Luca's eyes dropped to her wrist. He saw the fresh redness, the way she was cradling it. His head snapped up, and the fury in his eyes was so visceral that Elena took a step back. "This is why you should have told me his name," he roared. The sound echoed off the high ceilings. It was the first time he had raised his voice. It wasn't the petty, screaming rage of Derek. It was the thunder of a breaking storm. "You think this is a game?" Luca demanded, stepping closer. His hands clenched into fists at his sides as if he were fighting the urge to destroy something. "You think you can handle men like this? You cannot. They do not stop." "Elena, they never stop until someone makes them stop." "I didn't know he would be there," Elena cried, the tears finally spilling over. "I thought he was at work. I didn't want to cause trouble for you." "Trouble for me?" Luca laughed, a harsh, mirthless sound. He finally reached out, grabbing her upper arms. His grip was firm but not painful, grounding her. "You are not trouble, Elena. You are—" He cut himself off, his jaw working. He looked at her, his eyes blazing with a mixture of anger and something else, something desperate and terrified. "You could have been gone," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. If my men had been 30 seconds later, you would have been in that car. The reality of his words crashed into her. She slumped, her legs giving out. Luca caught her instantly. He swept her up into his arms, lifting her as if she weighed nothing, and carried her into the living room. He set her down on the expansive gray sofa, but he didn't pull away. He knelt in front of her, his hands still on her knees. "I'm sorry I yelled," he said quietly, "but do not ever hide from me again. Not with this." Hours later, the penthouse was dim and quiet. The city lights of Harborview burned outside the glass walls, indifferent to the drama within. Elena couldn't sleep. The guest room felt too big, too silent. She wandered out into the living room, wrapped in the cashmere blanket from the bed. Luca was there. He was sitting on the far end of the sofa, staring out at the skyline. A tumbler of amber liquid sat untouched on the coffee table. He looked exhausted, the lines of tension around his eyes deep in the shadows. He turned when he heard her soft footsteps. He didn't tell her to go back to bed. He simply lifted one corner of the blanket he had thrown over the back of the sofa, a silent invitation. Elena hesitated, then walked over and sat down. She didn't sit on the other end. She sat close, leaving only inches of space between them. She pulled her legs up, tucking them under the cashmere. For a long time, neither of them spoke. They just watched the lights of the boats moving in the harbor. He wasn't always like this, Elena said softly into the dark. Luca shifted slightly, turning his head to look at her. "Derek," she continued, her voice steady but quiet. "When I met him, he was sweet. He brought me flowers. He waited for me after my shift to make sure I got home safe. It happened so slowly. First, it was just comments about my clothes. Then it was checking my phone. Then he started telling me my friends didn't really like me, that he was the only one who cared. By the time he hit me the first time, I felt like I deserved it, like I had failed him." Her voice cracked on the last word. Luca's hand lifted from his knee. It hovered in the air for a second, trembling with hesitation, before he finally reached out. He placed his hand on the center of her back, between her shoulder blades. The heat of his palm seeping through the blanket was shocking. He spread his fingers, his hand covering a vast expanse of her back, rubbing slow, soothing circles. "He broke you down to build himself up," Luca said, his voice low and vibrating with suppressed violence. "It is what weak men do." Elena turned her head to look at him. Tears were streaming down her face now, hot and fast. "I felt so stupid. Everyone told me to leave, but I was so scared. I felt like I was disappearing." "You are not disappeared," Luca whispered. "I see you." The tenderness in his voice broke the dam. Elena leaned toward him, her body seeking the comfort he was offering. Luca didn't hesitate this time. His other arm came around her, pulling her into his chest. She buried her face in his shirt, smelling the starch and the sandalwood, and sobbed. She cried for the years she had lost, for the fear she had lived in, and for the overwhelming relief of being held by arms that were strong enough to crush her, but chose to hold her instead. Luca held her tight, his chin resting on the top of her head. His jaw was clenched so hard his teeth ached. He wanted to kill Derek Harlan. He wanted to tear him apart with his bare hands. The rage was a living thing in his chest, a black beast clawing to get out, but he forced it down. He forced his breathing to remain steady for her. Eventually, the sobs subsided into hiccups. Elena pulled back slightly, wiping her eyes. She looked up at him, her face flushed and wet. They were inches apart. The air in the room seemed to vanish, replaced by a thick, magnetic tension. Elena felt her heart pounding, not from fear, but from a sudden, fierce pull toward him. Luca's eyes dropped to her lips. His expression was unguarded, raw with a hunger that stole the breath from her lungs. He raised his hand, his thumb brushing away a tear that clung to the corner of her mouth. His skin was rough, calloused, but his touch was light as a feather. His thumb lingered on her lower lip, pressing just slightly, dragging down the soft flesh. Elena's breath hitched. She leaned in, just a fraction. She wanted him to kiss her. She wanted to know what it felt like to be touched with passion that wasn't possessive, with desire that wasn't violent. Luca leaned in too. His eyes were half closed, his focus entirely on her mouth. Then he stopped. A flicker of pain crossed his face. He blinked, the moment shattering like the glass on the restaurant floor. He cleared his throat, a rough, jarring sound, and pulled his hand away as if he had been burned. He turned his head, looking back out at the cold, distant city. "You deserve more than a man like me." "Elena," he said. His voice was rasping, hollow. "I don't want more," she whispered, the confession hanging between them. Luca closed his eyes, his hands clenching into fists on his knees. "You should." He stood up abruptly, the movement severing the connection between them. He walked to the window, putting the width of the room between them, leaving Elena sitting alone on the couch with the ghost of his touch still burning on her lip, the desire unresolved and aching in the silence. The door to Luca's study was made of heavy, dark mahogany, usually closed tight to seal off the business of the Marino family from the sanctuary of the penthouse, but today it was cracked open just an inch. Elena had been walking down the hallway, carrying a cup of tea, the soft carpet silencing her footsteps. She did not intend to eavesdrop, but the sound of her own name drifting through the gap stopped her cold. She is a liability. "Luca," Marco's voice said. It was not unkind, just brutally pragmatic. "Harlan is not working alone. My contacts in the precinct confirm it. Officer Grant has been scrubbing Harlan's file. Every time the police get a call about a domestic disturbance at his address, Grant makes it disappear. And in exchange," Luca's voice was lower, vibrating with a suppressed intensity. "In exchange, Harlan runs errands for the Novak crew." Marco replied. "He is the bridge. The Novaks want the waterfront. Luca, they are using Harlan to prod at you. They know you have taken the girl. They think she is your weakness. They are waiting for you to make a move so they can trap you with Grant's help." Elena felt the blood drain from her face. The porcelain cup rattled against the saucer, and she clamped her other hand over it to silence the noise. She had thought this was just about a jealous ex-boyfriend. She had thought she was hiding from a man with a temper. But she wasn't just hiding. She was a pawn on a chessboard she didn't even know existed. Derek wasn't just abusing her. He was selling her pain to Luca's enemies. The realization made her nauseous. She pushed the door open. Both men turned sharply. Marco's hand twitched toward his hip before he recognized her, and Luca stood up from behind his massive desk, his expression shifting from calculating coldness to immediate concern. "Elena," Luca said, moving around the desk, "you should not be hearing this." "So it is true?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I am not just a guest here. I am bait." Luca stopped a few feet from her. "You are not bait," he said firmly. "You are under my protection." "There is a difference." "Is there?" She stepped into the room, placing the tea on a side table because her hands were shaking too hard to hold it. "You and Marco are talking about turf wars. You are talking about corrupt cops and rival crews. Derek is involved with the Novaks." "He is," Luca admitted, watching her closely. "He's been trading on his connection to you. He bragged that he could get close to me through you. That put a target on your back long before I brought you here." "And what have you done about it?" Elena asked, her eyes darting between the two men. She saw a flicker of hesitation in Marco's eyes. Luca remained impassive. "We sent a message." "What kind of message?" "We found him last night," Marco said, stepping in before Luca could answer. "We made it clear that coming near you would be hazardous to his health." Elena looked at Marco's bruised knuckles, then at the stillness of Luca's posture. A sick feeling curled in her stomach. "You beat him, didn't you?" "We spoke his language," Luca said, his voice hard. "Men like Derek do not understand reason. Elena, they understand pain. I did not ask you to hurt him," she cried, backing away. "I wanted him to leave me alone. I did not want you to break his legs in my name." "We did not break his legs," Luca said calmly, though his eyes flashed with annoyance. "Not yet. We gave him a warning." "I am not an excuse for you to be a monster," Elena shouted, the fear and stress of the last few days boiling over. She felt trapped by Derek's violence, and now trapped by Luca's violence. It was the same poison, just packaged in a more expensive suit. "I won't be the reason you start a war. I won't have blood on my conscience because you wanted to send a message. Elena, be reasonable." Luca stepped forward, reaching for her. "Don't touch me," she snapped, flinching away. "I am going home." "You cannot go home," Luca said, his voice dropping to that dangerous, commanding tone. "It is not safe. I will take my chances," she said, turning on her heel. "I would rather be in my own apartment than in a fortress built on broken bones." She stormed out of the study, her heart pounding in her throat. She expected him to stop her, to lock the doors, to force her to stay. That is what Derek would have done. But Luca did not follow her. He let her walk to the elevator. He let her descend to the lobby. As she pushed through the front doors of the building into the cool evening air, she saw the black sedan waiting. The driver, the same one from before, stepped out. "Mister, Marino ordered me to take you wherever you wish to go. Miss Ward," he said, his face expressionless. Elena hesitated. She wanted to refuse. She wanted to take a bus and disappear. But she wasn't stupid. She knew Derek was out there. "Take me to my apartment," she said, climbing into the back seat, "and then leave me alone." The drive to her apartment complex on the edge of the city was silent. Elena stared out the window, watching the skyline retreat. She felt a profound sense of loss. She had felt safe with Luca, safe in a way she hadn't felt in years. But discovering the violence he had unleashed, even if it was for her, had shattered the illusion. She couldn't trade one abuser for a protector who used the same methods. Her apartment building was a squat, brick structure with a flickering light in the parking lot. The driver pulled up to the curb. "Wait here until I'm inside," he said. "I can walk to the door," Elena muttered, opening the door. She stepped out onto the pavement, clutching her purse. The air smelled of rain and exhaust. She took 3 steps toward the entrance when headlights blinded her. A car that had been idling in the shadows of the lot roared to life. It was a beat-up sedan, engine revving high. It didn't slow down. It swerved directly toward her, tires screeching on the asphalt. Elena froze, her brain unable to process the speed of the approaching metal. "Miss Ward!" the driver shouted. The sedan slammed on its brakes inches from her, the bumper clipping her knee and sending her sprawling onto the hard ground. The doors flew open. 2 men jumped out. They weren't Derek. They were strangers, hard-faced men in leather jackets. One of them grabbed her arm, hauling her up from the ground with brutal efficiency. "Get her in the car," one of them yelled. Elena screamed, thrashing against the grip. "Help!" The driver of Luca's car was already moving. He didn't shout. He didn't hesitate. He drew a weapon from his jacket and fired 2 shots into the air, the cracks sounding like thunder in the confined space of the lot. The attackers flinched. One of them reached for his waistband, but a second black SUV screeched into the lot, blocking the exit. More of Luca's men poured out. The Novak men realized they were outgunned. They shoved Elena hard, sending her crashing back to the pavement, and scrambled back into their vehicle. The sedan reversed wildly, scraping against a parked truck, and sped off over the curb, tearing through the grass to escape onto the main road. Elena lay on the asphalt, gasping for breath, her knee throbbing, the scrapes on her palms burning. Luca's driver was beside her in an instant, holstering his weapon. "Are you hit? Did they shoot?" "No," she wheezed. "I'm okay." She wasn't okay. She was shaking so hard her teeth rattled. She'd almost been taken. If Luca hadn't insisted on the driver, if he hadn't had a second car tailing them. 10 minutes later, she was sitting on the edge of her sofa in her small, dim apartment. The police had not been called. Luca's men handled things quietly. They were stationed outside her door and in the lobby. The door flew open. Luca stood there. He looked like he had run all the way from the penthouse. His chest was heaving, his hair wild, his eyes wide with a terror she had never seen in him. He didn't say a word. He crossed the small living room in 2 strides and dropped to his knees in front of her. His hands were on her instantly, not sexual, but frantic. He gripped her shoulders, his fingers digging in as if to anchor her to the earth. He ran his hands down her arms, checking for broken bones, then framed her face, turning her head side to side to look for bruises. "Where did they touch you?" he demanded, his voice a broken rasp. "Tell me." "I am fine," Elena whispered, though her voice shook. They just pushed me. My knee." Luca looked down at her jeans, where the fabric was torn at the knee, revealing a bloody scrape. He swore, a harsh Italian word she didn't understand, and looked back up at her. His eyes were glassy. "I told you," he said, his voice trembling with rage and relief. "I told you it was not safe. Why did you leave? Why did you make me almost lose you? I couldn't stay there. Luca!" Elena cried, pushing at his chest. "I couldn't watch you become him. I am not him," Luca roared back. The volume of his voice shocked them both into silence. The air in the small apartment crackled with electricity. Luca stood up, raking a hand through his hair, pacing the small rug. "Derek hits you because he is weak, because he needs to feel big. I do what I do because I need you to be alive. Do not compare me to him. Do not ever compare me to him. You sent men to beat him," Elena said, standing up on shaky legs. "You solved violence with violence. That is what he does. I solved a problem." Luca stepped closer, backing her up until her shoulders hit the wall near the entryway. He planted his hands on the wall on either side of her head, caging her in, but careful not to touch her. His face was inches from hers. "I stopped him from hurting you. And tonight? If my men had not been violent, you would be in the back of a Novak car right now. You think they would have been gentle? You think they would have asked you nicely to cooperate?" Elena couldn't breathe. He was too close. The heat of his body was overwhelming, smelling of expensive cologne and the metallic scent of fear. "I am scared, Luca," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "I know," he said, his eyes searching hers. "No," she shook her head, tears spilling over. "Not just of them. I am scared of you." Luca flinched as if she had slapped him. He started to pull back, his expression crumbling into defeat. "I am scared," she continued, grabbing the lapels of his jacket to stop him from leaving, "because I look at you, and I know what you are capable of. I know you hurt people. I know you have blood on your hands, and despite all of that, I want you to stay." Luca froze. He looked down at her hands gripping his jacket, then back up to her tear-filled eyes. "I want you," she whispered, the truth hanging heavy in the air, "and that makes me feel like I am broken, like I am drawn to the darkness because that is all I deserve." "No," Luca growled. He moved his hands from the wall to her waist, pulling her body flush against his. The contact was electric, a sudden shock that made her gasp. "You are not broken," he said fiercely, "and you deserve the light, but the light cannot protect you right now." I don't want protection," Elena said, pressing her forehead against his chest. She could hear his heart hammering against his ribs, a frantic rhythm that matched her own. "I want you. Just you. Not the boss, not the enforcer, just the man who fixed my arm in the kitchen." Luca let out a shuddering breath. He lifted one hand, sliding it up her neck to cup her jaw. His thumb traced the line of her chin, moving up to brush against her lower lip. His touch was reverent, terrifyingly tender. "I am trying," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I am trying so hard not to be that man with you. I am trying to keep the monster in the cage, but when I saw you on the ground, when I thought they had you—" He didn't finish the sentence. He couldn't. Elena looked up at him. She saw the conflict in his eyes, the war between the violence he lived by and the love he was terrified to feel. And she made the choice for him. She rose on her tiptoes. "Luca," she breathed. He closed the distance. The kiss was not like the violence of the world outside. It started slow, hesitant, a question asked and answered. His lips were warm, firm, and surprisingly soft. Elena sighed into his mouth, her fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt, pulling him closer. The hesitation vanished. Luca groaned low in his throat, a sound of surrender, and the kiss deepened. His arm swept around her waist, lifting her slightly, pressing her harder against the wall. His other hand tangles in her hair, tilting her head back to deepen the angle. It was desperate. It was the release of weeks of fear, days of tension, and years of loneliness. It tasted of salt and desperation. Elena felt herself melting into him, her body recognizing his as the missing piece she hadn't known she was looking for. There was no fear here, no pain. Only a consuming, fiery heat that chased away the cold memory of the pavement. He kissed her like he was drowning and she was the only air left in the universe. He kissed her like a man who knew he was damned, but didn't care as long as he could hold her for one more minute. When they finally broke apart, both of them were gasping for air. Their foreheads rested together, eyes closed. The only sound in the room, the ragged rhythm of their breathing. Luca's hands were still on her, one on her waist, one cradling the back of her head. He ran his thumb over her cheekbone, grounding himself. "Tell me," he whispered. Elena opened her eyes. She looked into the dark depths of his gaze and saw the promise there. It wasn't a promise of blind rage anymore. It was a promise of justice. A promise of a future where she didn't have to look over her shoulder. She took a deep breath. "Derek Harlan," she said, her voice steady. 249 East 4th Street, apartment 4. Luca's eyes darkened. The heat of the kiss cooled into a sharp, diamond-hard purpose. He nodded once, absorbing the information, locking it away. "I will erase him from your life, Elena," he vowed. He stepped back slightly, creating just enough space to look at her fully, but he kept one hand on her cheek, unwilling to break the contact completely. "But we do this my way," he said. "No more beatings, no more messages. I am done sending warnings. We will take everything from him, his freedom, his reputation, his power. We will leave him with nothing." Elena nodded. She understood now. He wasn't going to murder Derek in cold blood. That was the thug's way. That was Derek's way. Luca was going to destroy him with the precision of a surgeon. "Stay here," Luca said, moving toward the door but looking back at her. "My men are outside. No one gets in. I will come for you in the morning." He opened the door and stepped out into the hallway, pulling his phone from his pocket as he went. Elena watched him go, feeling the ghost of his kiss on her lips and the weight of his promise settling around her like a shield. The war had arrived. For the first time. She wasn't fighting it alone. The plan was not designed for a soldier. It was designed for a ghost. In the climate-controlled silence of the penthouse study, Luca stood over a sprawling map of the industrial district, his hands braced on the table. Marco stood opposite him, tracing a line with a marker. "We do not kill him," Luca said. His voice was devoid of the rage that had shaken the apartment the night before. This was business now. Cold, calculated, and final. "If we kill him, he becomes a tragedy, a victim of gang violence. The police investigation stays open, and the Novaks use it to rally. So we burn him down," Marco finished. "We erase him," Luca corrected. "We lure him out. We get him in a room with the Novak lieutenants and Officer Grant. We get them on tape discussing the distribution, the payoffs, and the abuse. Then we hand it to your contact at the Federal Bureau. He goes to prison for 20 years. Marco nodded. "And the Novaks get indicted on RICO charges. It cleans the board. But we need bait," Luca said, his eyes darkening. "We need something Derek Harlan wants more than he wants to hurt Elena." "Money," a soft voice said from the doorway. Luca and Marco turned. Elena stood there. She looked different today. The fear was still there, etched in the pale cast of her skin, but there was steel underneath it now. She walked into the room, her hands clasped in front of her to hide a tremor she couldn't quite control. "He wants money," Elena said, Mai stepping up to the table. "He has gambling debts. That is why he is working for the Novaks. If he thinks I can get him a payout, he will come." "No," Luca said immediately. "You are not going out there. I am already out there." "Luca," Elena argued, her voice rising, "I am the reason this is happening. You said it yourself. He is using me. If I am the leverage, then let me be the trap." "It is too dangerous," Luca snapped. "He won't come for anyone else," Elena insisted. She reached out, placing her hand over Luca's on the table. The contact made him freeze. "If you want to erase him, you need him to show his true face. He only shows that to me." Luca looked at her hand, small and pale against his own. He looked at the bandage on her arm, the visible reminder of why he wanted to tear Derek apart. But he also saw the resolve in her eyes. She needed this. She needed to stop running. She needed to be the one to close the door. "Send the text," Luca said, his voice rough. The text message was simple. "I can't do this anymore. I have access to his safe. I can get you $50,000, but I need out. Meet me." Derek's reply came within 30 seconds. Greed, as Elena had predicted, was a powerful motivator. The old freight yard, Terminal B. "Tomorrow at noon, come alone. If you're lying, Elena, you know what happens." That night, the penthouse felt different. The tension of the impending violence hung in the air like static electricity. But beneath it, there was a quiet, desperate intimacy. Elena found Luca in his bedroom. He was packing a bag, not for travel, but with equipment. A vest, extra magazines, a small, high-tech earpiece. She sat on the edge of the massive bed, watching him. He moved with a lethal grace. Every action efficient. He paused when he noticed her watching, then walked over and sat beside her. The mattress dipped under his weight. He rolled up the sleeves of his white dress shirt, revealing his forearms. Elena's gaze caught on a thin, jagged white line that ran from his wrist halfway to his elbow. Without thinking, she reached out. Her fingertips brushed the scar tissue. "Where did this come from?" she asked softly. Luca looked down at his arm, then at her hand. He didn't pull away. "I was 19. He said, "A deal gone wrong in Jersey." I hesitated. I thought the other man was bluffing. He wasn't. He turned his arm over, exposing the vulnerable inside of his wrist to her touch. "I swore after that night that I would never hesitate again," he murmured. "And I swore I would never care enough about anything to let it become a weakness. A weakness gets you killed in this life." Elena's fingers traced the pulse at his wrist. It was strong and steady. "Is that what I am?" she asked. "A weakness?" Luca looked up, capturing her gaze. His eyes were dark pools of conflict. "You are the only thing that has ever made me want to put the gun down. That makes you dangerous to me, Elena. But it does not make you weak." He turned his hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "You are not a monster." "Luca," she whispered. "Monsters don't make sure the doors are locked so I can sleep. Monsters don't look at me the way you do." "How do I look at you?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Like I am something precious," she said. "Like I am worth saving." Luca let out a shuddering breath. He reached up, cupping her face with his free hand. "You are worth burning the world for." He leaned in, and this time, there was no hesitation. He kissed her. It was slow, a savoring of contact in the face of the unknown. Elena melted into him, her hands moving up his arms to grip his shoulders. They shifted, sliding back onto the bed until they were lying side by side, fully clothed, pressed together from chest to knee. Luca's hand moved down her back, mapping the curve of her spine, pulling her closer until there was no space left between them. Elena buried her face in the crook of his neck, breathing in the scent of him, soap, skin, and the sharp tang of the city. Her fingertips traced the hard line of his jaw, memorizing the feel of him. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They just held each other. Two people on the edge of a cliff, finding their balance in the simple, grounding weight of the other's body. For tonight, the war could wait. Tonight, they were just a man and a woman, holding on. The freight yard was a graveyard of industry. Rusted shipping containers were stacked like rotting teeth against a gray, overcast sky. The wind whipped through the corridors of metal, whistling with a lonely, hollow sound. Elena stood in the center of the open clearing at Terminal B. She wore a heavy coat, her hands shoved deep into her pockets to hide their trembling. Tucked behind her right ear, hidden beneath the loose waves of her hair, was a microscopic recording device. "Keep your head up," Luca's voice crackled in her ear through a tiny hidden bud. "I am right here. You are not alone." She couldn't see him. He and Marco were hidden in the shadows of the containers, invisible, lethal ghosts. But hearing his voice steadied her. A black SUV crunched over the gravel, followed by Derek's beat-up sedan. The SUV doors opened first. Two men stepped out, Novak soldiers. They were thick-necked, wearing leather jackets that bulged at the waist. Then, a third man emerged, Victor Novak. He was older, with silver hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from cold marble. Derek got out of his sedan last. He looked jittery, his eyes darting around the yard. "Where is it?" Derek demanded, walking toward her. He didn't ask how she was. He didn't apologize. He just held out his hand. Elena took a breath. "I don't have the cash on me." "Derek." "I have the code to the safe, but I want a guarantee." Derek laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "You don't get guarantees, Elena. You get what I give you." Another car pulled up, an unmarked police cruiser. Officer Grant stepped out. He was in uniform, looking annoyed. He adjusted his belt, the handcuffs jingling. "Make this quick." "Harlan," Grant barked. "I am on shift. I can't be seen out here with the Novaks. We're just collecting." "Grant," Victor Novak said, his voice smooth and heavily accented. "The girl claims she has access to Marino's funds." Grant sneered at Elena. "This is the girlfriend? The one causing all the trouble? You need to keep your bitch under control." "Derek, I am tired of scrubbing your domestic assault calls from the log. The captain is starting to ask questions." The recording device behind Elena's ear caught every word. Grant had just admitted to obstruction of justice and corruption. "I am handling it," Derek snapped, stepping into Elena's personal space. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in. "Give me the code, Elena, now, or I will break your other arm right here." Elena looked at him, really looked at him. He was sweating. He was terrified of the men behind him. He was a small, pathetic man trying to stand tall by standing on her neck. And suddenly, she wasn't afraid of him anymore. She was just disgusted. "You are pathetic." "Derek," she said clearly. Derek's face twisted in rage. He raised his hand to strike her. "Wait." Victor Novak's voice stopped Derek mid-swing. The older man was looking around the yard, his eyes scanning the stacks of containers. He sniffed the air like a hunting dog. "This feels wrong," Victor said. "Where is the money? Why would she come here alone? She is stupid, that is why." Derek spat. "No," Victor said. He took a step back, reaching into his jacket. "It is a setup. Drop the weapon." Luca's voice boomed from the speakers of the hidden SUV that suddenly roared to life from behind a container. Chaos erupted. "Federal agents," Marco shouted. Stepping out from the shadows with a team of tactical officers Luca had brought in as part of the deal. Grant went for his gun. It was a reflex, a stupid mistake born of panic. "Don't!" Someone screamed. Gunfire cracked through the air. It was deafening. Elena screamed and dropped to a crouch, covering her head. Victor Novak, realizing he was cornered, didn't surrender. He lunged forward, grabbing Elena by the collar of her coat and hauling her up. "Back off!" Victor roared, jamming the barrel of his pistol into Elena's temple. "I will kill her, I swear it." The yard went silent. The tactical team froze. Luca stepped out from behind a container 20 yards away. He had a gun raised, his stance perfect, but his face was pale. "Let her go." "Victor," Luca said. His voice was calm, but it was the calm before a massacre. "You are done. The feds are here. There is no way out. I am walking out of here." Victor shouted, dragging Elena backward toward the SUV. Derek was scrambling behind them, looking for cover. Grant was already on the ground, hands on his head, surrendering. But Victor was a true believer. He tightened his grip on Elena's throat, choking her. Elena saw Luca's finger tighten on the trigger. He couldn't take the shot. Victor was using her as a human shield. She looked at Derek, who was cowering near the tire of the SUV. He was looking at the open driver's side door. He was going to leave them. He was going to leave her to die. A surge of adrenaline, hot and fierce, flooded Elena's veins. She wasn't a victim. Not today. She slammed her heel down onto Victor's instep with all her strength. At the same time, she drove her elbow backward into his stomach. It wasn't a knockout blow, but it was enough. Victor grunted, his aim wavering for a fraction of a second. Luca took the shot. The bullet struck Victor in the shoulder. He spun around, dropping his gun, releasing Elena. Elena scrambled away, falling onto the gravel. Derek, seeing his chance, didn't run for the car. He lunged for Elena. He grabbed her hair, dragging her across the sharp stones. "You are mine," he screamed, his mind broken by the pressure. "You are coming with me," Elena cried out, clawing at the ground. She rolled onto her back, facing him. As Derek leaned over to haul her up, his face twisted in madness, Elena reached up. She didn't beg. She didn't plead. She raked her fingernails down his face, aiming for his eyes. Derek howled, letting go of her hair to clutch his face. Elena kicked him in the chest, scrambling backward on her hands and knees. Get away from her! Luca was there. He moved like a thunderbolt. He didn't tackle Derek. He simply walked up to him, pistol extended. Derek stumbled back, blood streaming from the scratches on his face. He looked up and saw death standing in front of him. Luca's face was a mask of absolute, terrifying neutrality. He aimed the gun directly at Derek's forehead. "Please!" Derek sobbed, falling to his knees. "Don't shoot, he hit you," Luca said softly. It wasn't a question anymore. Luca pulled the hammer back. The click was louder than the wind. "Luca, no!" Elena scrambled to her feet. She threw herself between them, placing her hand on Luca's chest. He was trembling. The rage was vibrating through him like a high-tension wire. "Move." "Elena," Luca said, his eyes never leaving Derek. "No!" Elena shouted. She grabbed his gun hand, not pushing it away, but holding it. "Look at me." Luca's eyes flickered to hers. They were black, dilated, terrifying. "If you kill him, he wins," Elena said, her voice shaking but fierce. "If you kill him, you are just another thug with a gun. You are just him with a better suit. He hurt you," Luca snarled, "and he is done." Elena pointed at Derek, who was weeping on the ground. "Look at him. He is nothing. If you kill him, it is over in a second. I want him to live. I want him to sit in a cell for 20 years and think about this moment. I want him to know that I beat him." Luca stared at her. He saw the fire in her eyes. She wasn't asking for mercy for Derek. She was asking for mercy for Luca. She was fighting for his soul. Luca let out a long, ragged breath. The tension in his shoulders dropped an inch. "He wants prison?" Luca asked, his voice low. "Yes," Elena whispered. Luca looked back at Derek. He lowered the gun from Derek's head. Derek let out a sob of relief. "Thank God." Luca lowered the aim to Derek's right knee and pulled the trigger. The shot cracked through the yard. Derek screamed, collapsing sideways, clutching his shattered leg. "He can limp to prison," Luca said coldly. He turned and holstered his weapon. He didn't look at Derek again. He looked at Elena. He reached out, his hands shaking slightly, and pulled her into his chest. He buried his face in her hair, holding her so tight it almost hurt. "It is done," he whispered into her ear. "He is erased." Sirens wailed in the distance, getting louder. The tactical team was swarming the yard, handcuffing Grant and Victor. Marco was already talking to the lead agent, handing over the recording device. Elena stood in the circle of Luca's arms, listening to the screams of the man who had tormented her, and felt a strange, profound silence settle over her heart. The monster was gone, and the man holding her was still there. The fall of Derek Harlan was not quiet. It was a demolition that echoed through the city of Harborview for weeks. His face, once smug and handsome in a cheap way, was now plastered across the nightly news, accompanied by the mugshots of Officer Grant and the surviving members of the Novak crew. The headlines were sensational, detailing a ring of extortion, assault, and police corruption that had rotted the East End from the inside out. For Elena, seeing Derek in an orange jumpsuit, shackled and limping heavily on his shattered knee, should have felt like victory. It should have felt like the end of a long, dark winter. But as she sat in her new apartment, watching the television with the volume turned low, she felt a hollow ache in her chest that had nothing to do with her past and everything to do with her present. Luca was gone. He had kept his word. He had erased Derek. He had dismantled the immediate threat, and then, with the ruthless efficiency he was famous for, he had erased himself from her life. He had told her it was for her own good. He had said that with the Novak leadership dead and a power vacuum opening up in the city, he would become a lightning rod for violence. He could not protect her if he was standing next to her. So he had set her up in a modest, secure building in a quiet neighborhood, paid the lease for a year, installed a security system that rivaled a bank vault, and then vanished back into the shadows of his world. Elena tried to move forward. She enrolled in classes at the community college, working toward her certification as a medical assistant. It was work that made sense to her. Healing, fixing, mending what was broken. It was a way to reclaim the agency Derek had stolen from her. But at night, when the wind howled off the harbor and the apartment was too quiet, she would lay awake and remember the weight of Luca's arm around her. She would remember the way he looked at her in the freight yard, as if she were the only thing keeping him tethered to the earth. Violence in the city was escalating. Without the stabilizing fear of the Marino family's absolute control, which had been shaken by the federal investigation Luca had triggered, smaller gangs were fighting for scraps. The streets felt sharper, more dangerous. On the morning of the trial, the sky was a flat slate gray. Elena dressed carefully in a navy blue suit she had bought for the occasion. She pulled her hair back tight, revealing the face that was finally healing. The bruises were gone. The fear in her eyes was replaced by a grim determination. Today, she would take the stand. She would look Derek in the eye and tell the jury exactly what he was. She walked out of her building, clutching her purse. The courthouse was only 10 blocks away, and she wanted to walk. She needed the fresh air to clear her head. As she turned the corner onto 4th Street, she noticed a black sedan idling at the intersection. It was not one of the sleek, expensive cars Luca favored. It was nondescript, generic, but the windows were tinted, and it moved slowly, keeping pace with her. Elena's heart skipped a beat. She gripped her purse tighter. She told herself it was just Luca's security. Even though he wasn't speaking to her, she knew he still had men watching her. He wouldn't leave her completely exposed. She kept walking, her heels clicking a steady rhythm on the pavement. She rehearsed her testimony in her mind. He hit me. He controlled me. He threatened to kill me. The courthouse loomed ahead, a massive structure of white stone and pillars, surrounded by a bustle of lawyers, reporters, and civilians. Elena felt a surge of relief. There were police everywhere. It was the safest place in the city. She started up the wide concrete steps. The attack did not start with a shout. It started with the revving of an engine. The black sedan that had been trailing her suddenly accelerated, jumping the curb and screeching onto the wide plaza at the base of the stairs. Tires burned rubber, sending smoke into the air. People screamed and scattered. Elena froze, turning to look. The doors of the sedan flew open. 3 men spilled out. They weren't wearing masks. They didn't care about being seen. They were the remnants of the Novak network. Desperate men with nothing left to lose, looking to silence the witness who had brought down their empire. "Get her!" one of them screamed, raising a submachine gun. Gunshots cracked through the air. They weren't the cinematic booms Elena expected. They were sharp, ugly pops that sounded like firecrackers. Chunks of concrete exploded from the pillar next to Elena's head. Dust and stone fragments showered her face. She scrambled backward, tripping over her own feet, and fell hard onto the steps. The crowd was a stampede of panic, people rushing past her, knocking her sideways. The gunman was advancing. He walked with a terrifying, cold determination, raising the weapon to aim directly at her. Elena squeezed her eyes shut, raising her hands as if they could stop a bullet. Then, a shadow fell over her. It wasn't darkness. It was a wall. A heavy body slammed into her, not to hurt her, but to cover her. Strong arms wrapped around her waist, hauling her behind the thick stone of the nearest column. "Stay down!" a voice roared in her ear. Elena's eyes flew open. Luca, he was there. He was wearing a dark suit, dusted with concrete powder. His face was a mask of feral intensity, his teeth bared in a snarl. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking around the edge of the pillar, a handgun in his grip. He fired 3 times. The rhythm was precise, controlled, lethal. The gunman who had been advancing on Elena dropped, clutching his leg. Luca didn't stop. He grabbed Elena by the collar of her jacket, dragging her lower, shielding her body with his own. He pressed her face into the fabric of his coat. She smelled gunpowder and the familiar scent of sandalwood. "Don't look," he ordered. his voice rough. More shots rang out. Luca's body jerked slightly as a bullet chipped the stone inches from his shoulder. But he didn't flinch. He returned fire, his hand steady as a rock. "Luca!" Elena screamed, clutching his lapels. "I have you!" he growled, firing again. "I have you!" Police officers were swarming the plaza now, weapons drawn. The remaining attackers, realizing they were outgunned and outmaneuvered, threw down their weapons or tried to run. The chaos lasted less than 2 minutes, but it felt like a lifetime. When the shooting stopped, the silence was deafening, broken only by the wail of sirens and the sobbing of terrified bystanders. Luca didn't let go of her. He stayed crouched over her, scanning the perimeter, his body a tense coil of muscle ready to spring. The monster side of him was fully visible. The violence, the capability for death, but it was directed entirely outward. A shield of rage standing between her and the world. "Drop the weapon," a police officer shouted, training a rifle on Luca. Luca didn't panic. He slowly engaged the safety on his gun and set it on the ground. He raised his hands, but he didn't step away from Elena. "It is over," he said to her, his voice suddenly quiet. Elena looked up at him. There was a smear of blood on his cheek. Not his. His eyes were wild, dilated, terrifyingly dark. "Why?" she whispered. "Why were you here?" "I never left," he said. Federal agents pushed through the line of local police. They didn't arrest Luca. Instead, they formed a perimeter around him and Elena. A man in a suit, the contact Marco had spoken to, approached. "Mr. Marino," the agent said, "you kept your end of the bargain. We keep ours." Luca nodded. He looked down at Elena, and the fierceness in his face crumbled into exhaustion. "Come on," he said, offering her his hand. "Let us get you out of here." The secure room in the federal building was stark white, smelling of stale coffee and disinfectant. Elena sat on a metal chair, wrapped in a shock blanket, a cup of water trembling in her hands. Luca stood by the door, talking to the agents. He had refused medical attention for the cuts on his face. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had carried the weight of the sky for too long and had finally set it down. When the agents left, closing the door, the silence in the room was heavy. Elena stood up. The blanket pooled on the floor. "You made a deal," she said. Her voice was shaking, but not with fear. Luca turned to her. He leaned back against the door, crossing his arms. "I did." "You agreed to cooperate," she continued, the realization dawning on her. "That is why they didn't arrest you. That is why you were at the courthouse. You are turning over evidence on the other families. You are dismantling your own organization. It was the only way," Luca said simply. "The Novaks were not going to stop. As long as I held territory, there would be a war. And as long as there was a war, you would be a target." "So you destroyed your life?" Elena asked, her voice rising. "You gave up everything? Your power, your reputation, to protect me?" "I gave up nothing that mattered," Luca said quietly. "You could have died," Elena shouted, the anger finally breaking through the shock. She crossed the room and shoved his chest. He didn't budge, but he looked at her with wide, startled eyes. "You stood in front of bullets for me. Do you have any idea what that felt like? Watching you almost die? I would rather die than watch you fall," Luca said. "That is not enough," Elena cried. Tears were streaming down her face again. "I don't want a martyr. Luca, I don't want a bodyguard who throws himself on grenades. I want—" She choked on the words. Luca stepped away from the door. He looked defeated. He looked at his hands, hands that had hurt people, hands that had saved her. "You want a good man," he said, his voice hollow. "And I am not that. I am a monster. Elena, I have spent 30 years building an empire on fear. I don't know how to be anything else." He looked up at her, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "You ask me why I pulled away, why I left you alone, because I didn't know how to look at you without terrifying you. I didn't know how to touch you without staining you with my world. I have never been loved. Elena, I have been feared, I have been respected, I have been obeyed, but I have never been loved." He took a shaking breath. "How do you love a man like me?" he asked, the question hanging in the air like a prayer. How do you look at this? At the blood? At the violence? And see anything worth holding? Elena looked at him. She saw the bruises on his face. She saw the exhaustion in his posture. She saw the man who had cleaned her wound in his kitchen with hands that trembled. She saw the man who had shot Derek in the leg instead of the head because she asked him to. She saw the man who had just dismantled his entire identity just to make sure she could walk down the street safely. She stepped close to him. She didn't hesitate. She reached out and placed her hand flat over his heart. She could feel it beating, heavy, steady, alive. "I don't love the boss," she whispered. "I don't love the king of Harborview." She moved her hand up to his neck, her thumb brushing the pulse point at his throat. "I love the man who held me while I cried," she said. "I love the man who washed the blood off my arm. I love the man who chose to erase his own power rather than let a bully win." Luca stared at her, his breath hitching. "If you are a monster," she said fiercely, looking deep into his eyes, "then you are my monster, and I will love that monster as long as he keeps choosing life over blood." Luca let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. The walls he had built around himself, the walls of ice and iron, shattered. He reached for her. He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her neck. He held her as if she were the only solid thing in a universe that was falling apart. "Elena!" He breathed against her skin. He pulled back just enough to look at her. His hands came up to frame her face, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. He looked at her with a reverence that took her breath away. He looked at her not as a possession, but as a miracle. He kissed her. It wasn't like the kiss in the apartment. That had been desperate. This was a vow. It was deep and slow and terrifyingly tender. His lips moved against hers with a passion that stripped away the rest of the world. Elena melted against him, her fingers tangling in the hair at the nape of his neck, pulling him closer. She felt the cold metal of his belt buckle against her stomach, the rough fabric of his suit, the heat of his body. She felt safe. For the first time in her life, she felt completely, undeniably safe. Luca kissed her until they were both breathless, until the fear of the morning had been replaced by the fire of the afternoon. When he finally pulled back, he rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. "I am done with the life," he whispered. "I am done." "I know," she said, stroking the back of his neck. "We will build something new," he promised. "Something clean." "I know," she repeated, and she did. Standing there in the sterile light of the federal building, Elena knew that the story of the waitress and the mob boss was over. The story of Elena and Luca was just beginning. Epilogue 1 year later. The coffee shop on the corner of 5th and Main was quiet in the early morning. Elena adjusted the ID badge clipped to her blue scrubs. It read, Elena Ward, Certified Medical Assistant. She ordered 2 coffees to go, 1 black, 1 with 2 sugars. She walked out into the crisp autumn air. Harborview had changed. The crime rate hadn't vanished, but the organized chaos of the gang wars had settled. The federal indictments had cleared out the corruption, and a new, uneasy peace held the streets. A man was waiting for her on the bench outside. He wore a heavy wool coat and a scarf. He was reading a newspaper, his glasses perched on the bridge of his nose. Luca looked different. The sharpness was still there, the dangerous intelligence in his eyes, but the weight was gone. He worked as a consultant now, strictly off the books, helping the federal authorities understand the movements of the underworld he used to rule. He used his mind to keep the city stable, rather than his gun. He looked up when he saw her. The smile that broke across his face was genuine, warm, and just for her. "Hey," she said, handing him the black coffee. "Hey," he replied, taking it. He stood up and kissed her cheek. The gesture was domestic, simple, and it made Elena's heart swell every single time. "Ready for your shift?" he asked. "Ready," she said. "You?" "I have a meeting with the agent in charge," Luca said with a grimace. "He still thinks he understands the shipping routes better than I do." Elena laughed. She took his arm as they walked down the street toward the clinic. They walked past the old Rialto restaurant. It was under new management now. Elena didn't look at the alley. She didn't look at the shadows. She looked at the man beside her. They reached her clinic. Luca stopped and turned to her. He tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his touch familiar and grounding. "I will pick you up at 5, he said. "I will be here," she promised. She watched him walk away, disappearing into the crowd of morning commuters. He walked with a lighter step these days. Elena turned and walked through the sliding glass doors of the clinic. She took a deep breath of the sterile air. She didn't check the locks on the doors. She didn't look over her shoulder. She just went to work, knowing that when the sun went down, she would go home to a house that was safe, to a bed that was warm, and to a monster who had learned how to love. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been a journey through fear, danger, and ultimately redemption. I hope you enjoyed the story of Elena and Luca. I would love to hear from you. Please comment down below and tell me where you are listening from. Did you like the ending? What did you think of Luca's choice? If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories so you never miss an episode. Share your thoughts in English in the comments section. I read every single one. Until next time, stay safe and keep believing in love.